Welcome to a series of podcasts
created by the Experimental Film and Media Arts class at Universität der Künste in Berlin.
The program brings together artists, scientists, curators, and experts from other fields
who inspired us to observe and reflect upon our surroundings in a critical way. The series was conceived by Professor Nina Fischer in collaboration with art historian Christina Landbrecht and artist Lily Kuschel.
Last summer, we spoke with physicist Chen Gong, who currently holds a postdoc position at the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research. Chen Gong was interviewed by Christina Landbrecht.
The coronavirus attacked us this is like it's a war metaphor, but I mean, since the corona crisis, UDK basically decided to close its doors, and all the seminars had to be conducted online. So it's a big change also in how we teach today. And we had some conversations, and we also decided then at the beginning of the semester that it would be interesting to tackle this corona issue, because all of us, there's even some students, they're still in their home countries like Peru and Brazil, and couldn't even come back to Germany. And in order to talk about this issue, we decided to make Corona like one of our big subjects this semester. And so we also wanted to talk to you about Corona and climate, because there is, you always hear on the news sort of like how the lockdown has changed the world, has changed air pollution levels and so on. And I think there's also some myths around that, so it would be interesting to discuss that and elaborate on that. Yeah, since we talk about Corona and climate, I was interested because I saw over and over on the news, and I wonder if you have to show that. I think everybody knows about these pictures where you have sort of like megacities like Delhi in India, and then you have this divided sort of image, and on the one side of the image you see like the highly smog city, so there's hardly anything to see in the streets, and you have this view of the Gate of India. And you basically, it's only like sort of like in a misty, cloudy picture of it. And then you have an image of the lockdown, and the sky is blue and it's all like clear. And, all of a sudden you have this like magic moment of as if there was a ecological Photoshop going on. And as if the city has changed completely because there's no pollution anymore. And I always thought the media narrative was pretty simple. So it was like, it sounded as if a society that doesn't produce and doesn't consume is a relief for the planet. And I thought that's quite an interesting equation, or is that really an equation? So I wanted to talk about that and sort of like ask you if the lockdown really had a sustainable effect on the climate crisis.
It is true that this comparison, we can also see from, I hope you can see my slide, that there is also the side-by-side photo of, satellite photo of China. It's very distinct. Like before the lockdown, you see this orange area that is basically air pollution gas. That's the nitrogen dioxide. And then on the right-hand side, after the lockdown, you see it's gone. After only a few days, more like a month, and it cleared the entire country. So this shows us how, when we act collectively, how that immediately impacts the environment that we live in. And that is definitely true for air pollution. And when we think about it, it's also a good evidence that we don't have to reduce population to achieve a nice environment. Pretty much the same amount of people live in China in January and in February, but the air is so much nicer because they collectively acted. So that is very striking. It shows us what can be done, right? So we live in an industrial society, but it can still be pleasant for human beings, and we can achieve that. So this is really like a natural experiment that we scientists always dream of. What if everybody just stopped driving. And we see that thanks to this awful catastrophe that is the global pandemic. But it's nothing that we can simulate on the computer that as convincing as that we actually did it. But extending this message to climate change, it can be misleading, and that really has to do with the nature of pollution. So we think of pollutions as just bad things for the environment, but of course, each behaves slightly differently, and in this case, it's drastically differently. So if you focus again on my slide, this photo of air pollution. So there's before and there's after. And as soon as we stop driving and the industry factories shut down, it has changed. So I think of it as if it's a sieve, right? So you pour water in and we are kind of inside the sieve. And then this water is some pollutant and makes us sick and makes our air bad. But if we wait long enough, just a little while, it will just be gone. However, climate change is mainly driven by CO2, but also other gases. But CO2 is the main driver. However, CO2 as a gas behaves as a pollutant very differently. It is a gas, but it is very different from how we in our everyday conceptualize gas. So I'm sorry, I will show many graphs today. So just let me know if you have trouble reading anything on the graph. And then I will just describe. Right. So the purple line you see is the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere. That tells us how much CO2 is around us, basically. And you see this has a very long time axis. So from 1750 to today. And then you see the blue line that also goes up. And this is the emission, CO2 emission. And we see that they are really behaving very similarly. So as we emit more and more CO2, there's more and more CO2 in the atmosphere. It's very one-to-one. And then we also see that when did we start to emit? That's quite a long time ago, 100 years ago, more than 100 years ago. That's the Industrial Revolution, when we had steam engines, when we burn coal that boil the water, and then the steam pushes these pistons that drives the machines in the factories, the trains. That is already when we start to emit CO2. And you see that it doesn't dissipate. As we emit, this concentration just continue to rise. It doesn't dissipate like the photo with the air pollution. So if we stop emit, it will still stay there. And this is really like, this is not like a sieve, but more like a bathtub. And so once released, it is here to stay. It is not intuitive at all. It's not our daily experience with gas. When we think of gas, it flies away at some point. But CO2 does not behave that way, because it has a very slow natural rate of removal, basically from plant, ocean, or soil. It doesn't really bind to any artificial things. It only can be captured by these limited, finite, natural things. And so what we have done through Corona lockdown is that we have just turned the faucet. We turned the faucet a little bit lower. And how low I will show you. But the water is still filling up. It's getting higher and higher in the bathtub. And it's not a sieve in the sense that, if we wait, it doesn't really drain because there's only a very, very small amount.
That's interesting how you explain that, because that seems that the equation that the media makes and sort of like these binaries grows which is a bad thing, versus steep growth, which is a good thing, doesn't really help so much, does it?
Yes. Yes, it's about how we grow. It's not about grow versus not grow. I will continue to show the slide. I will get to this growth debate very soon. So how fast does this bathtub drain? And this is a striking graph because it puts you into a perspective how big the scale of the problem of CO2 is. So again, we see a CO2 concentration rise. This is just the right-hand corner of the last graph, pretty much. And then you see these red zigzags. And these are seasonal fluctuations. So winter, summer, winter, summer. And this is, why does it fluctuate like this? It's because all the trees in the northern hemisphere, so there are more land in the northern half of the globe than the south. So there are more trees there. And the trees, when they grow, they store carbon. So this is why we see a very short decrease of the concentration of carbon. And then when they fall and they naturally release the CO2, it increases again. So this is all the trees in half of the earth. They can only absorb this much. And then but the big black line is, of course, how much we're putting it into the atmosphere. So I want you to think about it because, media also say plant trees. And when you look at this graph, it's just not true, right? If we plant twice as much trees as we have in all of northern hemisphere, it's not enough. And then meanwhile, we see that the emission has come back to normal. So this is this year, February, March, April, and now it's June. And we see that we're emitting just as fast. So this is, again, how much the faucet is turned. Right, so before we're turned up here, and then we have moved it a little bit. At the most point, it's minus 15% for the entire world. So the first wave of China lockdown, you see this big area of decrease in emission. And then now it's the big wave in the global lockdown. But at the most point, it's 15%. So basically, we have turned the faucet 15% less. And now in June, we basically turn back to 25%. So it's a very sticky problem. So you remember the 15%, right? So at the lowest point, there's a 15% decrease in how the faucet is turned. And if you look at the projection, this is the current projection. So it's from 2019, last year, actually December, so a few months ago. Mm-hmm. And you see that to reach the 1.5 target, this is the best scenario or the best pledge from the Paris Agreement. You have to reduce 15% every 2 years. So we have to do a new lockdown every 2 years. That's the scale of the problem. And we have to do basically 15 lockdowns, equivalent lockdowns to reach 1.5 degrees. So that is the scale of the problem. You realize how difficult it is. And but it's not all bad because this projection is recent, and but 5 years ago the projection was even worse. So if you compare these two graphs, you see that the prediction of temperature warming has dropped since the last 5 years. This is because we did something. So this comes back to the growth problem that Christina raised. Was it because we grew less in the last 5 years that now we see our fate has become better? No, it's because we know how to grow. We have grown smarter. And that is by transitioning energy, transitioning how we use energy. So instead of burning fossil fuel, we use renewable technology. So this is a transformation brought to be realized by technology, not by necessarily consuming less, because the world is consuming more, but consuming smarter. And we will see that it's not true that that by making the world poor or grow economically less, we reduce emission. In fact, the contrary. We have seen economic growth, but emissions reduced. Yes.
May I interrupt quickly? Because that is really interesting, the graphs that you're showing us now, because it seems that you're already starting to use the data you collected during lockdown. And you're also, will you be able to use it to sort of like, use it in political discussions and see like, this is, if we act together, we can achieve that. If we act collectively, we can do that. If we would have a lockdown every other year, this would be possible. I mean, politicians, of course, know how expensive a lockdown is, but could you use these graphs to steer the discussion? As a, sort of like, is the lockdown actually a good thing for you as a researcher?
Yeah, so it is kind of, there's nothing surprising to the scientists because we know how much transport emits. And when we reduce transport, we expect that the emission will go down.
Yeah.
But we collected data more on the system reaction to it. So we see that, by the way to solve the pandemic problem is not to go tell everybody individually, you should wear masks, you should stay at home. What happens is that the government responded. The government said everybody should stay at home. Everybody should wear masks. And then the government also allocate resources. That's very important because an individual cannot tell the labs to start a vaccine as well as to tell the car industry to produce masks, which is what Germany did, right? Germany didn't have local production of masks, so they did ask the car industries to make the masks. They have the machines to do that. Yeah, not individual action, but a system-wide action. And also the scientific communication is very interesting. So the flattening the curve, that is a system thinking behind this message, because it means not that nobody should get sick or some kind of individual message, but to say not to overwhelm the medical system. Because that's what we saw in Italy. When they overwhelmed the medical system, the death rate just shot up because people who need breathing machines, they cannot get the care they need because there are too many people in the hospital. So the flattening the curve is to think, yes, we live in a society and there's a responsive institute that is the hospital that will help us. And it's really important not to make that institute lame or disabled. So yeah, it is very good from a scientific communication point of view and a policy point of view. So how we solve climate change is also that individual could, protest the government. Okay, you have to do something, but in the end, it has to come from some kind of collective action like we have now.
And do you think it's a top-down issue? Some things like it's hard bottom up. It's rather a top-down thing.
I will explain. So it is both. So this is the individual action versus collective action, or individual action and collective action. I think both are too simplified. There's a relation to it. I will get to the, so how I imagined it is like this. Sorry, let me skip a few slides. Yes. You cannot see the arrow, unfortunately. So individual action, small scale, collective action. You can think of this as Fridays for Future. Or you can think of it as Greta Thunberg. And it shows there's a need for change. Something needs to change. But also you can think of it as show what can be done. So I'm talking about, maybe a small village in Germany decides to build its own solar farm, or decides to build its own wind power plant. And they collect some money and make that happen. And this is also very important, not just for protest, but to demonstrate what's possible. And then that leads to some kind of movement that we call maybe Fridays for Future. But also it leads to medium-scale demonstration. Maybe, a bigger German city see that the German village did it well. It scaled up. It says, okay, we have more population, we have more power demand, but we also can get our money together and build a similar solar farm and wind farm, and even the state government. So you can think of it also as like California, even though in the US where President Trump is very anti-green movement, but California is very green. It's basically better than Germany. Has really increased its effort. And that put political leaders under certain pressure. Right, so you think of Fridays for Future showing up every weekend at the parliament. And the political leaders, they will think, okay, this means something has failed. That's not good. We have to fix it. But it also put some competitive pressure on the dirty industry. So think of the German city again. The German city also built a solar farm and a wind farm, which means the people are paying less money to coal power plant. And the coal power plant is losing business, but no worries, the government gives some subsidy, but still, they're thinking, yeah, maybe people don't want this. And then the political leader also say, yeah, let's do some legislation, some regulation, some subsidy, some CO2 tax. And then the coal power plant feels even more pressure, because they have to pay now for their pollution, and they're more expensive if they have to pay that. And the government even give, direct grant or loans to projects to make the small scale project even better, more efficient, cheaper, easier to produce. And that leads to a coordinated collective action. So this is kind of like the COVID lockdown, that everybody have decided to stay at home, social distancing, and wear mask, and behave responsibly, not to overwhelm the medical system, not to overwhelm the hospitals. And that leads back to individual action, right? So everybody behave as they should for a sustainable future. So this is really a loop, right? So it doesn't end anywhere. You can start here, that leads back to itself. And so when you do it several times, then certain things change drastically. As we see this time with the German government stimulus, for example. So you think Fridays for Future, did it work? Yes, it did. Without Fridays for Future, we wouldn't be here. So what the German government did just maybe 1 month ago, they have decided to this green stimulus plan that Christina talked about. So they invested in hydrogen. They said every tank station should have a charging station for electric cars. If German car manufacturer want to sell dirty cars, they don't get a premium to stimulate the economy, only if they sell green cars. That is a big signal. I mean, it's not from 0 to 1, but it's a very, very clear signal that Germany, the world's car factory, basically, want to do something. And that is really big. That is not possible without Fridays for Future. It's because this pressure that's put on them for a while now. And so that will lead to even more individual action, right? People will see, there's more charging station. Maybe I will buy an electric car because I'm not worried that, if I buy one, I don't have places to charge it. And then more people see, there are electric cars around, or my friend has one and he really likes it. Maybe I will buy some too, and I will tell my friends. And that put even more pressure on competitors that are diesel cars, right? And then the government might even think, maybe we do some more legislation, like if you buy a car, you get even more money, or you can charge it at even more places, at home, at work, and that leads to even more collective action. So this is how I see this debate. It's not versus, it's not and, but it's really a loop.
Could I have one question there? Because you talked about electric cars in the state, in the region where you live, in Brandenburg. They're soon going to build one of those gigafactories, like one of those big Tesla factories. That was to me, it came I think to everyone in Germany, it came as a total surprise that the state of Brandenburg had actually negotiated with Elon Musk about that for quite a while, and that after China, basically Germany now becomes such a big place for the production of electric cars. Do you think that was a decision, a conscious decision to to invest also not to invest directly, but indirectly in new technology feeding sort of green energy? And
it's a deliberate strategic plan. So even before the crisis, so you're right that it has been a long-term plan. At least I have heard about it already last year, that Europe wants to become the green industrial continent. Mm-hmm. Japan wants more solar panels, wants more batteries. Europe will sell it to, and it's to basically also bring industry back. Because, that the globalization version 1, that is the one that ran from 1990 roughly to 2010, that didn't work really. It led to financial crisis. It led to right-wing populism, right? When we think of what happened after the financial crisis, and the inability of government to respond to every citizen's demand. So the globalization needs to be rethought. So we cannot, again, like the growth and regrowth, we can't have no globalization. We have to have some globalization, but what type of globalization? And Europe's green industry is part of that, is to make, to bring industry back from Asia. And because to produce real things is not the same as producing only services, because it has a stable amount of value added, and it's also stronger. So if as you see, when Corona happens, there's this huge disruption of the supply chain. So German factories are shut down, not because of social distancing, but because the Asian factories that produce its upstream components cannot deliver. And then the downstream components don't get produced. And then the downstream components from there also don't get produced. So we have a globalization that has a huge supply chain. That every tiny little screw and bolts are made in China. And without those, you can't make cars. That's a problem. And also economically, it's hard to stimulate jobs if you don't produce real things. I mean, there's only finite amounts you can sell with coffee or restaurants, these service jobs. And they are all suffering because of the lockdown, because people don't go to restaurants anymore. So these are very fragile systems. They want to stabilize the system, build the supply chain locally, so that they have this revenue, and it is a healthier economic system. And I think they realize that. And even Trump wants to bring industry back to the US. But there was a long-term strategic plan also to bring industry back to the US. So I think, when people think, no, it's anti-globalization movement, all these populism, they don't want globalization. It's really the economic globalization. Not that you and I cannot travel the world anymore. We also see, like, Trump also has the visa bans. But from a bottom-up point of view, society wants a more equal arrangement for globalization so that the workers can benefit more.
But then I encounter one contradiction, because if Europe wants to become the green continent now, first of all, like, why are they buying the green energy from Tesla and haven't sort of like much earlier started to work on the car industry and really sort of like push them into producing more electric cars? That I find a contradiction. And then there's a second contradiction, because I felt that already in the early 2000s, the solar panel industry was a very German industry, and it was located in the Dresden area, Saxonia. And it collapsed within a decade, basically. So it was sort of like this hopeful try to really build a green industry in Saxonia. And then one had the feeling, also getting from the media, that after the German government decided not to give subsidies anymore, the whole industry went bankrupt and moved to China. So that I find interesting contradictions if we talk about Europe becoming the green continent now.
Yeah, I didn't quite understand the first. Do you mean like because it's buying from Tesla, or it's a Tesla plant that it is?
Yeah, because I mean Germany is like it's the car country. There's so many car brands here, and they could have with Volkswagen, with Mercedes, they could have wanted to make a plan at the beginning of the millennium, actually sort of like let's do it before Tesla even started.
These are not contradictions, but really fit into the version 1 of globalization that I talked about. German car industry has resisted for a long time because it relies on exporting cars to the rest of the world. They think that if it transitions to electric, it won't have the same market. It will have to spend a lot of money in investing in new technology that's not profitable. It's better to wait. Maybe US will do it, right? So nobody wants to be the idiot that spend a lot of money to make good things possible. Everybody wants to be the smart guy who comes in and when there's something already working, make it sellable, right? So this is a dynamic. So German car industry wanted to wait, and they always say, yeah, if you force me anything, I'll fire everybody. And then you'll have a lot of unemployment. And so it's kind of holding the government hostage in certain ways also. But that has recently changed also because including China, everybody's banning diesel cars. So it's not that they suddenly realize they should be better, but rather if they wait too long, nobody will buy their cars anymore because you can't drive it in China. So that has really tipped them over. And also the Volkswagen scandal. The Volkswagen scandal also bring Volkswagen especially, tip them over the edge. And they say, okay, we're completely destroyed. We've completely destroyed our reputation. Let's think of electric cars. But everybody else, Daimler, BMW, they're far behind. And they only did this because they realized where the wind is blowing, they can't just continue the business model inside Germany, right? They have to sell it to the rest of the world. And the second, that's the first, is because only Tesla and China could make electric cars. No German manufacturers could. And then the second prediction,
the solar panels.
The solar panels, yes.
Yeah.
So that was also a deliberate policy. So it was subsidizing the local industry, but because of this political struggle, so it's a political fight with the industry, German industry, which is largely conservative politically, doesn't want a green competitor. It doesn't want a political enemy inside its own industry landscape. So it has pushed for policies that basically remove the subsidy, and then everybody who produced solar panels went bankrupt. So this is a deliberate policy, and we still see that there's some political issues. So, for example, I can't tell specifically, but scientists who study climate have been having trouble sometimes to get funding. So they see their fundings cut. For example, last year, the German, one of the German funding agency cut Fraunhofer's funding by 92% in 2022. That means, all these scientists who rely on being paid every 2 years, the contract, they can't be renewed. They have to leave and they go to their home country, usually never come back. So it's a deliberate attack also. So there are these fights. But actually, after this corona crisis, or during this corona crisis, German government finally said, okay, cars, we're not going to do policies just for you. And I think it's also, partially also the car industry realized it cannot continue like this.
Corona crisis really has had an impact sort of like on the reaction of the German government. And also, do you think that the whole investment in green hydrogen, does that directly relate to Corona?
That has also been a long time coming. It's just like a good opportunity to do it. Mm-hmm. It's kind of almost like an excuse to do it. Mm-hmm. Because in economics, you think of the growth almost like a cycle. So, there's tech company like the .com phase in 1990. Everybody, let's all do internet, let's all do digital, and then everybody put their money in this industry. And then at some point, the industry doesn't produce enough value to warrant that amount of investment, and then the bubble bursts. So you can think of it as a cycle. So it's an expectation rising, and then suddenly it collapsed because it doesn't actually produce that amount of value that people thought it would. And so you have this boom and bust cycle in the economy. So coronavirus is an exogenous shock. It's not about how people have expectation of economy. That too, but it's not driven by that. It's driven by a virus. So what happens is that now the economy is not doing well because a lot of people don't go to the restaurant, don't go to vacation. Everybody stays at home. Everybody's saving because nobody knows what will happen in the future. No one wants to spend a lot. That's bad for the economy, but traditionally, and this governments 100% always do in situations like this, is to increase public spending. So you think of the expectation as all these private investors, but public spending is supposed, not always happens, but supposed to counter that, supposed to smooth out the cycle. So when nobody spends, government spends. Mm-hmm. Right? And government spends through many ways, and it raises its money in many ways. Mm-hmm. So if you think back to 2008, that's not what the government did. The government didn't spend, it cut spending. Right? That's the austerity politics. After the last crisis, they didn't do the right thing, so to speak. And that causes the Eurozone crisis. Mm-hmm. So they save the banks, but put the debt on government. Mm-hmm. And they say, oops, we have a lot of debt. Let's everybody save. Mm-hmm. And that didn't work, as we see, right? So Italy has now a right-wing populism. Everybody has a right-wing populism problem because if you don't spend on public welfare, people will get angry. Mm-hmm. But this time it seems that they're doing the right thing. So they didn't invest. They did invest in hydrogen, but and also these charging stations and how like home heating efficiency, insulation, not enough. People still say it's too little money. They should have spent it maybe 5 times more. But still, it's something. It's not a lot, but it's a kind of a direction.
Pretty interesting if you think about learning effects, because talking about the solar panel industry, that moved to China now. And was there a learning effect from having the industry in Germany?
Yeah, so that's a very good point. So we think of price drop as something just naturally happens. It doesn't. You only get cheaper technology by producing more of it. This is an effect that we see. So you can see with your smartphones or with laptops, it used to be really expensive. What makes them cheap is not some genius in a laboratory or in a university that comes up with a better cell phone. The innovation happens inside the factories. So by producing more and more, they realize, by making the machines bigger, I can produce more efficiently. Or by replacing this part that takes maybe 10 steps to make, I make a new part that takes only 2 steps to make, and so on and so forth. And that's why we see price drop in technologies. And that happens with the solar industry. So Germany was so to say the idiot that has put a lot of money, invented this new technology that saved us. Really, if Germany had not been the idiot that did that, and because US could have done it, but US didn't, right? So Germany did it. If Germany didn't do it, there's no amount of Chinese industry that could bring solar panels so cheap to today. So basically, Germany invented it, but because of political struggle, went bust. It moved to China. China scaled it up. So China scaled up the industry completely and built in the supply chain there in the last 15 years. So it's not just one factory that makes solar panels, but many factories that make parts for solar panels. And they made patent how to recycle the solar panels more efficiently, because the old ones are getting old and they have to reuse the material. Yeah, many innovations happened in China, but not the initial ones. The initial ones, you really need a very advanced like industrial society that are rich and could put this money to invest in it. So hopefully we will see that with hydrogen, because hydrogen as a storage is very important, but it's not quite like solar panels. It still requires a lot of chemistry, a lot of pipes, and the factory looks very, very complicated. I've seen some photos. I don't know how much of that can be scaled up or can be simplified. But again, we also thought the solar panels cannot be so cheap in early 2000, 20 years ago. So now the solar panel is 1% of the price from 1990. So it has reduced so quick that many people are very surprised. So it was very, very underestimated. The learning cycle is so fast. And it's mostly because of China, because it has all these people, resources to make it really, really cheap. And it's still dropping. It will decrease another 25% till 2025 in 5 years.
Wow, interesting. I was wondering, because now we're talking so much about the entanglement of climate research and politics. What role does the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research play in German politics? Like, are there many of your tutors and professors, are they corresponding directly with politicians? Are they sitting in the ministries? Are they constantly advising them? Like, how is that exchange going on?
Yeah, so what PIC does is policy research for the most part. So if you know IPCC, that's the report that almost all climate activists know. We contribute to that. So it's we submit papers and they still have to look at it and see if it's good, very good. Then we become selected and be part of the report. My group has also historically contributed to IPCC report, and that I'm very proud. So from this panel, this international panel for climate change, we have contributed a lot. And in the German climate protection policy, we also play a big role because we just got a grant 2 weeks ago from German government, along with many institutions. And we will do modeling, analysis, scenarios, and come up with ideas how to go further. Because Germany has gone very far. If you think about Germany's natural endowment, it's not very rich in terms of renewables. It has a lot of wind in the north, as I spoke to Nina just now, where she comes from. But it's not very sunny, right? There's not a lot of sun. It's very north, so it doesn't have, it's cold in the winter that people have to heat their homes with fossil fuels traditionally. And it has a lot of industry. And these are all sectors that are not so easy to green, like the power sector. So yeah, we are coming up with ideas how to do that because, just electricity is a very small part. There's industry, heating, transportation, and so forth. And we do, I think a lot of them sit in the so-called interest groups. So you can think of it as a room of 10, 20 people, any size, and there's some government representative, there's some industry representative, and there's us. And then we talk about what can be done, when can we do it, what do the industry want? Because, a lot of them also come around, and also if they're not car industry, they can be very friendly, or they can see this as an opportunity. Because, they could benefit from this if they use a lot of electricity. And maybe they will think, if we have a lot of solar, we have a lot of wind, that means when it's producing and not being stored and nobody needs it, it's kind of being thrown away. And so this actually through the corona crisis, industry has been reduced so much because of the supply chain disruption that the electricity price has gone negative in Germany. That means you are getting paid to use electricity, right? So a lot of industries are thinking about that. Yeah, maybe I can benefit this by using really cheap electricity at certain time of day when nobody wants it. So they're eager to talk and with these interest groups that we can kind of share our ideas. And they also want to know certain things from us, like how cheap the electricity will be in 10 years.
But then on the other hand, there's also what I gathered from the Fridays for Future movement. They're also quite involved in with scientists, with climate scientists, right? They're very knowledgeable. I mean, you mentioned the report that they all know and that they cite from, but I also have the feeling that they get consultations from climate scientists because they also like when you see like Luisa Neubauer in a talk show, she's totally informed, and I always had the feeling like, is it true that she has sort of like scientific advisors that talk to her and brief her about certain things that make her more knowledgeable?
Yes, definitely. So it's not just the scientists, but also the think tanks. So these are policy centers that connect science and policy. So we also do that. Historically, they listen more to the climate scientists and not the climate mitigation scientists, and even less to the climate adaptation scientists. So, yeah, so climate scientists tells you, for example, how much the world will warm with CO2 emission that is currently it is now. And it tells you with 3-degree warming how much the sea level will rise, how much the ocean current will change, how many animals will go extinct, what else? Many effects from climate change. Climate mitigation is to basically energy vendor, right? To change the energy, how we consume energy, to make climate change not so not the effect of climate change better, but to make climate change less. So that we can adapt to it more easily. And climate adaptation scientists, these are the people who say, okay, the Earth can only support so many people. What will happen to our society? What do we have to do to protect us, protect the humans? And these are the people who say, who will see the migrations, right? So how many climate refugees will there be? Are there water scarcity because it's raining less due to climate change? And the food security, right? This time, China had a food security panic because it traditionally buys rice from Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia this time refused to sell it to China. There was a panic. And so you see also food security because of because climate change also makes natural disasters easier. So like the locusts, there's a locust problem in Africa and India right now. The locust disasters, droughts, floods. Canada has so much floods in towns that the insurance companies are in trouble. Government have to come save the insurance market because so many people lose their homes and file insurance claim. The insurance companies can't pay. So these are the things that I think Fridays for Future, an average person, and the media, and even the scientists, that they don't think too much about. So these are the systemic risks, right? So you think of like, it's kind of flattening the curve with Corona. Normally you don't think of hospital as playing a huge role. So normally you don't think of insurance company as facing a lot of risk. But, these are the first responders. People need help. People need to recover their damages, but not at the same time. If the risks are highly correlated, everybody's having trouble at the same time, it overwhelms the system. And then things are really bad. So people need to think more about these sort of issues. Or, it threatens the energy system, sea level rise, because a lot of oil refineries are on the coast because they need a lot of water to cool their machines and cool their plants. So you can see a scenario where a lot of chemicals will seep into the ocean because these plants are by the shoreline. So if they raise, all these toxic waste will just go into the ocean. And that happens, for example, in the US, 40% of the oil refineries are in coast of Mexico, where Hurricane Katrina happened. And they're just a few feet from the shoreline. And that supplies the entire oil and gas for Midwest, for New York. So this system risk to be more addressed. I think a lot of scientists mistake that as giving up. They think, if we think too much about just how to cope, then we don't change how we consume energy. I think people are seeing that, we do have to think about the so-called adaptation, to grow different crops, and to irrigate our field better, more efficient, save up water, because we also need water to store up renewable electricity. That maybe it's good to combine the water management system and the energy management system so we can manage water better. So these are the things that I think about a lot. Even as a mitigation scientist, I think about combining the two to minimize the risk from the causal point of view, right, to reduce emission, also to minimize the risk from the downstream. So because we know it will be warming, it will be more and more warming. Even if we stop emitting, we will still warm because of the inertial effect. The risks are there, and we don't know all of them. That's the scary thing. We only see them when they happen, like with the insurance, right? Or another funny systematic effect is that a lot of animals get eaten by their predators because their furs don't change color in winter. So winter is warmer. But you can't think of these things. You can only observe them and see, oh, that's actually due to climate change. That's
because at the moment the industry is also trying to get industry of production back to Germany. Do you think there is a chance that they will get back some a part of the solar panel production, or is it too late? So now it's in China and they produce it very cheap. Because I know there's a huge acceptance also in Germany, or there was a huge acceptance for this solar panel industry, and people really liked the fact that they were built here. And many of us were very sad that it has gone, and this was really a big failure also of the politics, I think. So I don't know, is there a chance that it will come back?
Yes, anything is possible. I think as long as there's a political will, because, if things are really made happen or not happen by people who are in charge. So, but, other than solar, there's also many things that Germany could produce. Like wind turbines, they could also produce, or the storage, or batteries. They're all ingredients for a successful energy transition. I think the thing with solar panel is that Germany doesn't have a lot of sun. And it's kind of nice when you have, when you have a lot, you can create a lot of value with the products that you produce yourself, right? It doesn't mean that, anything is possible, really. But yeah, an industry is important. And also,
also there has been a lot of development also like since the 70s and 80s, like with the green when it started. So I also remember that there's a lot of initiatives, but most of the times there hasn't been enough support. But slowly it was growing, and now I think the time has really come, and there is really much more acceptance also in the politics. So I think it's a bit late, but we're on a good way.
I mean, Germany has very good advantage of actually having industry, right? I mean, you think of Japan has quite a bit of industry, Korea has a lot of industry, US doesn't really have, it has some, but more development. They have a lot of startups that sell their technology to China, and China makes it.
Yeah, that's true.
Sort of division of labor, but US doesn't have really an industry. Britain also doesn't have an industry, right? It used to have a lot of industry. And Margaret Thatcher got rid of it, right? Always some people made that happen. Or Clinton signed a NAFTA that basically says, okay, we make this trade deal with China, which means your job will be done by Chinese, right? So they betray their people. Really, in certain sense, less of this neoliberal transition. It didn't financialize like the UK did, but also means it's hard to transition because it has so much industry. But it's good that you have industry, you have knowledge. People want to become engineers. People understand complicated topics. Germany is good positioned. It doesn't have to go from 0 to 1, more like 0.5 to 1.
No, that's true. Yeah. And I have also another question. When I was in Japan, I talked to some people, engineers, and they tried to develop a kind of wave plant, like from the tide when the water is coming and going, and from this movement to earn some energy by some underwater plant.
On this little island, I think 20,000 families with waves. I think the problem with wave energy, or rather limitation, not the problem, the limitation is that you can't do it everywhere. You kind of need a sort of shallow lakes or ocean to do it. And so in that sense, it's a little bit like geothermal. So geothermal is also perfect, right? It's zero emission. When you have it, it's like limitless. It's just heat from the earth, from inside the earth. But you can only do it in certain places. But yeah, this is the importance of education, right? So telling people these are the possibilities. Look around you, look what you have. And but the problem is most people don't have very special, especially endowed. That's the problem of scaling up, right? So I talked to two people who, along with others, own a solar farm company in Germany. Collectively, they own 2 gigawatts worldwide of solar panels. That is huge. It is a huge company, and it's worth a lot more than it used to 10 years ago because people are buying solar panels like crazy. And they tell us why they're not growing even faster is they can't find electricians. The scientists don't think of that usually. They think, we just have to scale up. The government just have to make the right policy. The market will respond. But it takes some time to grow an electrician, right? It's easy to write a policy, but the young people also have to want to do it. But I think the media or the green, especially the green activism, always conflates the technology with dirty. Growth with unsustainable growth, consumption with also unsustainable growth. That has to change. We need circular economy in the export, to design a product that can be easily recycled. Like we think of our laptop. How is it recycled? Not very ecologically because it's not designed to be recycled ecologically. So we need all these industrial engineers also to come up with new ideas. Unfortunately, nobody is talking about it. I think about it constantly. And also, this is world picture. It could also be that, all the engineers, all the electricians will come from China or come from India. That's also possible. There just have to be enough of it. But again, these are the jobs that Western society, anybody can take because it hasn't happened yet. Right? It's about who realized it first and think of it as an opportunity and a challenge and that they can do it. And it's again, I don't see that enough. Germany is well positioned because it has industry. It has enough engineers already. But even here, it's hard to find technicians sometimes, right? It's hard to find. The mining expert, people aren't really thinking of. The mines are also elsewhere, so maybe the mining expert will be in those countries. But these are the skills that's needed for this transition. It's not just to shop less. Of course, everybody should shop less. Think twice before you buy anything. Before you charge your smartphone even. Everybody should be more efficient. But it's not a degrowth story. This is something that's growing, and it's growing very fast. And to demonstrate again, the decoupling from economic and emission is very important. So people think of, consumption is because we want to have 5% growth. Everybody should go out and buy a fridge every year so that German economy can grow. That's not really what we see. So you see this is 1990. Sorry, it's too small. 1990, this is 30 years ago. You see gross domestic product. So this is just how German economy is growing. So we have, as a society, become richer. And gross power consumption increases a little bit, not that much. Primary energy consumption. So these are like coal, gas, anything. Solar is decreasing a little bit. So we're consuming less energy in general. We're only increasing consumption a little bit. And our greenhouse gas emission has decreased by almost half, more for 30-40%. So we have decoupled our economy from emission. And that we have already seen in more advanced countries, in Scandinavia, than in the green transition, than Germany. So that means their economy is growing, but their emission has reduced. Mm-hmm. So it's not a grow versus not grow story. It's to also decouple, right? So yeah, people will still buy cars, but they will be electric cars. People will still buy a fridge, but a fridge will be made from green electricity. Or you buy a house, but the house cement will the CO2 release from making the cement will be captured. Mm-hmm. Or the industry come up with a new cement that doesn't produce CO2. Right, so we will still see pretty much everything that we need. It's just how they're made. That's different.
We also saw before, or we heard about that at the Potsdam Institute of Climate Research, also working sometimes with arts. So I wonder, is there any collaboration with artists, and what kind of projects are also interesting or be like a win-win situation? And how do you think about the role of arts in the future of collaboration, maybe?
Yes, because as you see, I tell the story with visual graphs and these visual storytelling is very important. So what we have done, I will send you the slide, and at the end there are some websites that also show, at least coming from the scientists, what does the communication looks like. So there are these tools that you can play digitally on the website. What if I grow trees everywhere? Will that solve the problem? Or what if I transform all the cars to electric? Will that solve the problem? So there are these tools that you can play. And yes, so I think coming from us to communicate our science, we need digital designers, web designers, visualization experts, and that could have an artistic component. But as you see, that this isn't like to communicate the existing science is also not quite enough, because there's a larger story here, right? It's about all these geopolitical stuff, this globalization, who does what, and that really needs some creativity. I think the best way is to do maybe a film, like a documentary. Mm-hmm. I say that because Michael Moore has produced this Planet of Humans, I think it's called. And it's been really heavily criticized by scientists. That's unfortunate. That's really unfortunate. It seems like the art world has really not been talking to the science world. Because he did something right, but especially in renewables, he thinks that making solar panels and wind turbines are just as sturdy. And that is partially true before, and it's not true at all today. It's partially true because the electricity is half dirty. Well, even today, the electricity is half dirty in Germany. But the thing is, in the future, it will be 100% green, right? And also, you can use green electricity to produce solar panels and wind turbines. So they kind of it's a snake that feeds itself, right? So that's unfortunate. So Michael Moore has a really, he's very famous. He did a lot of thoughtful political commentary, and he wasn't sound on the science. So I imagine an artist, a filmmaker could make this a coherent story. It's a very complex story, and many people are not thinking about the risks, especially. And so it could be a very scary story too, but how to make that positive, right? How to sell that also has an aspiration story. It's tricky, but So this is what we can offer. I think a lot of scientists are willing to collaborate with artists as an advisory role or as a contractual role, that they make a tool to visualize, or that they advise on what the artists want to do.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, but I think also it's challenging, and also the research practices of artists also changed a lot. I mean, there's a lot of good documentary makers, and even on television find very interesting about the current situation in climate research. And the role of the artists, I think, also changed a lot since maybe in the last 30 years, researching on individual projects, and sometimes they go somewhere north to the permanent ice areas. They stay there for months. They do their research together with scientists. And this could be not only visually, but also from the impact and from the depth of the research. Would be interesting to collaborate.
Yeah. It's very challenging to depict humanity because we live in industrial society. So we are a bit detached from the reality of factories. We're detached from the minds that make our lives better and so forth. So it's I think artists can take that as a challenge, especially to be more to find the emotional narrative for a seemingly cold and unkind industrial society. That will be very interesting because, I think a lot of artists, when they make ecological products, they are anti-industrialization. I rarely see a positive that says, industrialization, it just means highly efficient production. And we can highly efficiently produce things that are bad, but also highly efficiently produce things that everybody will need, and at a very cheap price or a cheap costs. Right? We think of medicine. We can cure disease because of industrialization. To find that emotional angle, that is I don't see that very often. To connect, what we are, which are these humans who feel all these emotions and who want to feel cared for, who want to feel that we live in a nice society, that nobody is angry. But we are embedded in this larger industrial story. I don't think humanity have really grappled with that, especially the art world hasn't really grappled with this industrial side of things. So for example, this graph in front of me, right? So the economy is rising, greenhouse gas is decreasing. And people usually say, no, it's because we buy everything from China. So it's, the emission, it's emitted in China, it's not counted, this is why. It's not true. It's not true. Because if you look at the export, so Germany also is not just importing goods from China, but also exporting chemicals, like to France, to everywhere. These emissions are emitted in Germany, but sold somewhere else, and they are equal. So the imported emission equals the exported emission because Germany is also an export country. This is very easily misunderstood by media because we somehow have these simplified narrative or wrong narratives that maybe used to be true or that sound plausible, but it's really important to understand them accurately because that makes it correct, right? You have to tell right things from wrong things. Yeah. So I mean, I'm not a very creative person. I can tell a story, but to find that resonance, like Lisa said, this mountain resonance, but also emotional resonance. A good art has to resonate with people. Right? But how do you make industrialization? How do you make globalization? It's such a complex, such a huge scale story, understandable. So I think we have to start small. So, make a story for Germany, just for Germany, and then make a story for India, and just for India. Make a story for cement industry, and just for cement industry, and see what is there.
But I think also you took us on a real journey today, and I think part of why we understood why we could follow you so well was really the graphics and the statistics and the graphs you showed us and the curves. I think that was absolutely helpful to follow you and see sort of like how complex this climate research seems to be. I don't know. I mean, part of the time I thought you're an economist because you could explain economic issues so well and how interdisciplinary your research is.
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about it, but my research is not oriented in this direction. So that's a lot of political economists. They're not really, I mean, they're thinking about different problems than climate change. I think climate change, they see even Trump is doing it. So they don't see it as an ideological problem. They more focus on like the international monetary financial order, right? They're thinking about how to change that fact, that the poor country can't get out of the situation they're in. And the good thing, I know these things because also thanks to social media. So there's also a lot of narrative about social media. There's fake news and so forth. But for scientists, especially I think climate science, I follow very diverse people on social media that are experts, that I know they have published a lot, and I know what they do, and I follow them. And I see then the world from a different perspective, because these people tweet very different things, right? And so, yeah, I think thanks to social media before, you have to email an expert and ask very embarrassingly, what do you think of this? And they will never answer, right? So these days it's a little bit different. And I think, if you want to know certain things, it's out there, and people know the answer. People know what happens. People can tell you why things have happened, but you have to know, these people knows.
True. Super. But thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us. It means a lot.
Yeah, very happy.